The Age of War draws to a close, and with it, one of the most tumultuous times in Conan's life cycle is hopefully ending too. Today, as I've done for every chapter thus far, I'll be reviewing the final offering for The Age of War Chapter 4. So without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, for some context, this chapter was added to give the team more time to finish off the content they wanted to in the Age of War proper, and whilst it wasn't the worst chapter, it's pretty symbolic of the struggles Conan was facing at the time, which was that the devs were stretched very thin, doing too much, too fast. Changes were made in that aspect for this chapter, which is why there is a fourth one, and the mid-season update too. Structure-wise, we will firstly cover the Age of War Chapter 4, then the mid-season update, then the Bazaar, the bugs, and we'll go into the final rating. The first major feature of Chapter 4 was, of course, the Sacred Hunt, an event that sounded fairly promising conceptually, but ended up being let down by the sheer amount of grind required. The Sacred Hunt was, in my opinion, ruined by its balancing issues. The event asked you to travel far and wide to tackle its bosses and gather the fangs needed to buy the rewards, and that grind was far too tedious for most, requiring a huge time investment to get all the rewards on offer. That, along with a bug that prevented some players from even being able to access the event in the first place, ended up really souring people on the Sacred Hunt. I personally liked it, but mostly on thematics and lore. I thought it fit well into the after effects of the Age of War and the Siege of Almeria, and the storytelling and lore presentation was pretty good. The grindiness of it all just made it unbearable for most, and I agree, the event was asking far too much of the players for far too little reward. The event also had this weird thing where it was there initially and everyone thought it would stay for the whole update, then it went away with very little notice, then it came back, and then it went away again later with the mid-season update. To be honest, it should have just been left on until the mid-season, given at the time it hadn't been announced there would be a mid-season update, but still, there was no need for it to go off and come back on. Conceptually it was quite good, and on the story front I think it was great, but a failure in its most important aspect, gameplay. Hopefully when it returns in the future, the Sacred Hunt gets a much needed rebalance to make it enjoyable, and not a long, arduous grind. Fatalities made it into the game too in this update, bringing glorious violence to Conan Exiles. I'd love to show you some footage, but seeing as Fatalities footage is, pretty gruesome, I think I'm going to have to skip it. There were some initial teething issues, but the system ended up just being a reasonably nice, though ultimately somewhat minor addition, probably fitting right where it should have in terms of importance. Using Fatalities to encourage aggression in combat and reward it with buffs was a good implementation, the animations were gloriously violent, and to be honest, it just felt quite cool. A small addition, but a fun one. The Purge Expansions brought new waves to the Purge, and I think this feature was executed fairly well. Thieves and Conquerors were okay, but nothing to really write home about, a nice lower level addition. Golems added a nice target priority dynamic that really put your base at risk, and the Starcaller is the ultimate spectacle, making battles feel epic whilst also putting you in real danger of losing a large chunk of your base and hard-earned resources. There was also the addition of the Siege Ballista. I think that was fairly good, finally bringing these weapons into the game. Fun to use with a satisfying design, these had a decent enough niche in PvE Purge defense. I enjoyed the Purge expansions as a whole. I know some people are mixed about the Purge rework in general, but I really enjoyed it. Chapter 4 also had some smaller combat changes, restoring the ability to toggle off or on rotating during attacks with your camera. I hated that change in Chapter 3, it felt really clumsy, so it was good to have the option restored in Chapter 4. The devs also reduced rotation on some of the biggest offending enemies that would track you perfectly. I didn't actually hear much talk about laser-guided enemies after this, nor did I really notice any aimbot enemies in my game, so it looks like it might have done the job. Rolling Thrust also lost its stamina bonus, and stamina regen was changed to start 1 second after use, not 0.1. These changes seem to have been fine on PvE. I know the PvP folks will likely have very strong opinions about it. I'm not a PvP player, so I'm not going to try and represent their opinions here, as I probably just wouldn't get the nuance of it, unfortunately. Combat changes were generally pretty small this chapter. The two things people really wanted changed got just that, with the rotation toggle and the nerf to enemy tracking, so not bad overall. Inventory and follower quality of life was easily the most contentious part of this update, and for good reason. On the good side, changes to the radial wheel made it slightly faster to use, and migrating thrall commands from the radial menu to their inventory screen was a really good change that made life a lot easier. I think this change to the UI was quite effective, Moving those options out of the radial makes a big difference and makes the behaviour system far less opaque. Bearer Thralls also had a big HP nerf that was horribly received, but it was mostly reverted, pending the addition of the down but not out system. On the inventory side of things, well, it seems to have been something of a disaster, and fell into the usual trap of if it's not broke, don't fix it. The previous inventory system was serviceable. There may have been some areas it could have been improved on, but people had grown used to it over the years, so the changes to inventory management threw a lot of people off, and also introduced a whole wealth of bugs. Pretty much the only thing people did like was the ability to fill existing stacks in chests, but even that came at the cost of precise split stack being removed. It was later restored with a hotfix, but there was just no need to remove it in the first place. The inventory changes caused a lot of community anger and a lot of frustration. Even now, so far removed from its first implementation, there is still work to be done, still bugs to be fixed, and to be honest, the inventory part of this really wasn't needed. Battle Pass progression was also improved this chapter, making it so you could level the Battle Pass through direct gameplay, never actually needing to do any of the weekly challenges, which were also changed. This revamp of the system was absolutely for the best. It made it so much easier and faster to complete the Battle Pass, but it wasn't well communicated. I saw a lot of people that thought the challenges had just been changed and that was it. There was nothing explicitly telling you that you get Battle Pass XP from doing stuff in-game, nor about the daily XP cap or anything like that. Again, it was absolutely a change for the best, and probably how the Battle Pass should have launched. However, lack of communication hampered it greatly, and many people just were not aware of how it worked and how much faster it was. Great change, badly communicated, and unfortunately the good work done here would be invalidated by what we are about to talk about. In June, the devs dropped a mid-season update, the first of its kind around 3 months after the release. This came as a surprise to many, and was part of the announcement that update cadence would be changing from every 3 months to every 6 months, alongside the removal of the Battle Pass. In terms of features, the mid-season update brought 2, the down but not out mechanic, and the return of the Headhunters and Witch Hunts event. For the big news from this mid-season update first, the changes to update cadence and the removal of the Battle Pass were unfortunate but necessary. The removal of the Battle Pass in the Age of Heroes basically does invalidate the improvements made in the first half of Chapter 4, but it is what it is. If those resources can be used to make the game better, that's probably the best place for them. Onto the features. Down but Not Out actually seemed surprisingly unbuggy in my testing and experience, and fortunately I've not seen too many people saying they were having issues with it. The system was about as simple as I think it could have been, but seems to have worked well. The headhunting event also returned from the Age of Sorcery Chapter 2, replete with new rewards. Witch hunts were also meant to return, but seem to have been bugged and just never spawned. The new rewards were a very welcome addition that enticed engaging with the event again, and even though I would have liked to have done some witch hunts, they were far and away the most inefficient method of getting obelisks for headhunting, so not too much was lost. This update also fixed a bug with interacting with items in a workbench, which was very annoying. The mid-season update was fairly good. The main issue was how it was handled. People had been grinding the Sacred Hunt, and it was, again, very grindy. This update dropped with no announcement and yanked the carpet out from people who were saving their fangs to buy all of the hunt rewards at once. They didn't lose their fangs, they could still keep a stockpile of them for the next time it comes around, but it just wasn't planned well. I guess the devs wanted this update to be a surprise. I can understand that, but it wouldn't have been too hard to say the Sacred Hunt ends on this date without spoiling the contents of what's in the mid-season update. After all, this update wasn't entirely out of the blue. People were just not expecting a mid-season, they were expecting the start of the new age. That's really my main criticism of how the mid-season drop was handled. The content itself was fine, but ending the Sacred Hunt event with no real warning to those that were still grinding it just didn't feel good. On the bugs front, for the entirety of Chapter 4, it was, as you may have seen from the thumbnail, pretty messy. I unfortunately didn't keep a long list of bugs that I added to throughout the age, so I'm having to go back and pull out as many as I can, so I may have missed more than there is here, but I think I managed to get most of the big ones, and they are as follows. Falling through foundations, a whole bunch of bugs and issues with the inventory rework, bench navigation issues, some jank with the fatality system, not all bearers getting their reversion of their HP nerf, dying to undermeshing, followers not fighting Sacred Hunt ambushes, Sibtar server crashes, and Were-Hyena ambushes for the Sacred Hunt not appearing for characters over level 60. Like I said, messy. Some of those were fixed, Funcom were decent about getting some early hotfixes out, which was nice to see, but some issues like falling through foundations and some of the inventory problems still persist now, and it seems like they are really big issues that are taking a lot of time to fix. To be fair to the devs, they have acknowledged that they know about these issues and are working on it, but all signs seem to indicate that they are really quite complex problems, and if the extra time they take to fix those issues avoids another situation like the Numidian Foundation bug, I think I can accept waiting a bit longer. Overall, a really buggy chapter. Nobody seemed to get falsely banned this time around, which was good, but the slew of bugs, big and small, made things pretty difficult to enjoy for most. Onto the microtransactions. The battle pass this time around, the final battle pass unknown to us when the update first dropped, was pretty good and had a very cohesive style focused towards Zingara, and was definitely geared towards builders, decorators and roleplayers. The Bazaar was, honestly, much of the same this time around. The final extension of the dungeon set was okay. I think I've warmed on it slightly since I initially reviewed it. The set is still probably close to the bottom in terms of quality and usefulness. I appreciate them trying to bring it up to a good standard, but I just don't think in the end it was as successful as Aesir, for example. The mid-season update brought the Yamatai Towers extension, which was honestly a night and day difference compared to Dungeon. A lot of care and detail have gone into it. It was decently priced, and everyone I've seen talk about it seems to love it. Probably the best extension they've done to date, and a real high point. There were other bundles too, but nothing groundbreaking as such. Yamatai Onsen was a bit expensive but quite nice. Some were disappointing like Barach and Castaway, whereas some others were actively quite bad like Poitain Knight or Celestial Scholar, both of which were rather expensive for what you were getting. Aside from Celestial Scholar's heavily inflated price tag of $28 though, nothing was really out of the ordinary from the usual pattern, and it was nice to see the arcane building pieces getting re-released with a new coat of paint. Again though, nothing really new on the Bazaar front in terms of breaking the patterns we've already seen. So, all things considered, where does the Age of War Chapter 4 update fall in terms of a numerical rating? My scale starts at 5 and it gains or loses points based on positives and negatives. It's not overly mathematic, it's more on the whole product. My highest rating was an 8 out of 10 for the Age of Sorcery Chapter 3, and my lowest was a 2.5 out of 10 for the Age of War Chapter 3. All things considered, the Age of War Chapter 4 gets a 4 out of 10. It wasn't as bad as Chapter 3, and I think the content they added was decent aside from the Sacred Hunt, which was just disastrously balanced, but the bugs are again the main killer here, especially the Siptar crashes and falling through foundations, the latter of which is still an issue. It also didn't help that Funcom fell into their usual trap of quite limited communication at times. They started off well with 3 hotfixes in short order, but they do honestly have a bad habit of going silent for a bit to hopefully work on fixes, at times when the community does need reassurance. That being said, I will give them credit for the humility to accept and outright state in the Chapter 4 mid-season devlog that the product is not the quality it should be, and actually taking steps to fix it by changing update cadence and removing the battle pass. Both are good to see. We won't get the full scope of if those changes have improved the game yet, so I've not given them any points in that aspect. The sentiment itself is correct and very welcome, but I want to see results, and hopefully we'll see that in the Age of Heroes Chapter 1, and probably even more so in following updates. Additionally, Funcom have apparently been hiring new staff members to work on Conan Exiles and communicate with us. I know the new community manager Carol on the forums has spearheaded a lot of communication lately that has been really welcomed. Hopefully that is a constant. For better or worse, communication is always better than radio silence. Overall though, again for all the positives and negatives, the Age of War Chapter 4 gets a 4 out of 10. Not the worst chapter to date, but enough bugs and issues to hamper the experience. The Age of War has just kind of been cursed, I think. Hopefully the Age of Heroes changes course and brings Conan Exiles to where it should be. Thank you for watching. Do let me know your thoughts on the final chapter of the Age of War in the comments below. A massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. If you want to get videos early, consider joining all those lovely folks over on Patreon, link in the description and pinned comments. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.